For the first 25 days of December, we're going to be doing a readathon for my newest book, Nick. We know this isn't for everyone, so if you don't want us to read you a bedtime story every night, we'll still have our regular vlogs every Tuesday.
But if you do want to come along, then come on! Alright, chapter 12, the cargo hold. As soon as they were alone, the magic fizzled out, and all the three children were back to being visible. They had been holding their breath, but now exhaled a big sigh of relief. Even with their safety assured, Emma's heart was still racing and Nick's skin was still crawling, and Gilbert could feel his nerves rattling through him all the same. "What should we do now?" Nick asked the others. "We can't stay in this closet any longer. If we do, it'll just be a matter of time before we're found." Emma retrieved her map from inside her pants pocket. She then unfolded it to see how far they had traveled. By the look of her disheartened expression, they hadn't journeyed far at all. "We've hardly moved on the map." She noticed the painted version of the SS Vixen no more than an inch from the docks of New York City. "It looks to me that we're still several days away from Norway. Perhaps even a full week." "A week?" Nick exclaimed. "It's just a guess, but it looks that way to me." He stressed, "Emma, we can't hide for a week. The captain is already on to us." She folded her map and stowed it back in her pocket. "What did you think? The North Pole was only a few days' journey away? Nick, it's clear across the world." His skin tightened around his tendons as his anxiety skyrocketed. "I just didn't anticipate we would be stuck on a ship for a week. It's only day one and already we've nearly been caught. I don't think any of us would do well in this custody of the Norwegian police." "I don't think it's the Norwegian police we have to worry about." Gilbert caught their attention. He was standing right beside them, although a few feet lower, as he was much smaller than his friends were. He was holding the empty shell of a drained Cracker Barrel that was now sapped of magic after their little invisibility trick. "What do you mean by that?" asked Emma. The first mate found one of our Cracker Barrels, but more especially, he knew what it was." Nick didn't understand why this was such a concern for Gilbert. Why should that matter? "Because Cracker Barrels are manufactured by elves, which means he's probably an elf," realized Emma. Nick pondered this for a moment. "But he didn't have long pointy ears." "He was wearing a cap," said Gilbert. Emma's eyes widened. "He was wearing a cap, wasn't he?" Nick wasn't so convinced. "The whole crew are wearing caps. They can't all be elves." "Or can they?" wondered Gilbert. "Perhaps they can," Emma said warily. Nick dismissed them both with a chuckle. "The two of you are overreacting." He fetched his coat from off of the top of a tower of crates and then proceeded to put it on. "And where exactly do you think you're going?" inquired Emma. "I'm going to take a quick look outside. Perhaps I can find somewhere on this ship better suited for the three of us to hide for the next few days." Emma didn't like the sound of this, and her feelings about it were quite noticeable in her expression. "Nick, I don't know. If there are elves on this ship, evil ones at that, you shouldn't be the one roaming around, especially not alone. Don't forget it's you they're after." "Only because Avelmark thinks I have a rock I don't have." He gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "I'll be back before you know it." Nick went for the heavy metal door, where Gilbert stopped him. "Take this." He tossed him a Cracker Barrel. "If you find yourself in trouble, all you have to do is imagine something. You can whisper it to the bell if you like. It helps. Really, it does. It's like the magic can understand you. Like, somehow it's listening." "Thanks, Gilbert." He tossed the Cracker Barrel back to his young companion. "But I'd rather not." "Nick, please take it," pleaded Emma. "Say what you want about magic, but I don't trust it." Nick fought his arms through the sleeves of his coat. He looked at Gilbert. "Sometimes the most wonderful things in life are also the most dangerous." He paused for thought. "Take love, for example." He opened the metal door and stepped out into the hall, and was gone. Nick began through a narrow corridor, walking slouched so as not to bump his head on the low ceiling. The hall was long, and it branched off several times down even longer hallways, each of those corridors forking off to even more hallways. Nick quickly came to feel like a mouse in a maze hunting for a piece of cheese that he would probably never find. He went on to check for unlocked doors, hoping to locate a room suitable for them to hide. Most of the doors were locked, and the ones that weren't had problems of their very own. He came to a room furnished with a pair of bunk beds, each of the 4 mattresses occupied by a snoring sailor. One of the sailors had his buttocks raised like the peak of a mountain. another one with his thumb in his mouth, and the third snoring while drooling into his pillow. And lastly, one was nuzzled up with a teddy bear. Nick caught his laugh while closing the door quietly behind him. The next room was just as unsuccessful, with 4 more sleeping sailors, all snuggled up in their sheets. The one after that was the same, and so was another one after that. Just when Nick was about to give up and head back to his friends in a janitor's closet, he came upon the staircase leading down to the lower deck, and then he descended. The staircase opened up into the cargo hold. It was jam-packed from wall to wall with all goods and trades that were aboard the vessel. Nick headed down the center aisle, first amongst barrels of wheat, then between crates of corn, then finding his way down a row of caged livestock. There were cows and horses and even a few plump pigs rolling around in their own filth. The whole room smelled terrible, so much that Nick had to learn to breathe solely from his mouth. He continued through the aisle until he reached the end. There he spun back around and took it all in. The tower of barrels, the stack of crates, caged livestock, and realized that this was a perfect place for them to hide out, at least until they reached the docks of Norway. Nick was just about to head back upstairs to fetch the others when he heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs from the upper deck. He felt a bolt of immediate panic jolt right through him. He scurried aimlessly around in a circle, then spotted a box of raw potatoes and jumped behind it. "Captain, may I have a word with you in private?" Very slowly, Nick peeked out from behind the box. The captain and his first mate came into view as they descended the last few steps of the stairwell, stepping into the cargo hold. "What is it, Belsnickel?" The first mate reached into his uniform pocket and drew out a tiny golden bell. "Do you happen to know what this is?" He dropped it into the captain's own palm. "Well," the captain held it up to his dark, aged eyes, "I would say it's a bell of some kind." "And I wouldn't say you're wrong." Belsnickel retrieved the bell, holding it delicately between his thumb and index finger. "It is an elven-made object called a cracker bell." The captain chortled amusedly. "A cracker bell? Bit of a silly name, don't you think?" "Silly, yes, but not to be mistaken for anything less than exceptional." Nick watched as the first mate continued to observe the tiny, golden bell with an unwavering gaze. The cracker bell originated in the North Pole, in CLAUS village, and was crafted by a toy maker by the name of Mr. McTwizzle. The captain was unsure why this was a point of discussion. "So it's a toy, is it?" "Not quite." Belsnickel furthered his explanation. "Indeed, the cracker bell was designed by a toy maker, but it should not be mistaken for a toy, and it is much more than that. As you're already aware, magic is created by the joy of children, but only elves can manipulate it. However, the cracker bell was designed to house a drop of magic, and would allow even a human such as yourself to bend the magic inside to your will. Belsnickel, I'm sure you have a point, but please get to it quickly so that I may continue my duties as captain of this ship." Belsnickel wrapped up his explanation. The toy maker who designed this particular instrument left the North Pole after it was overtaken by Lord Avamork. He now resides in New York City, where he operates a toy shop for both humans and elves alike. He curled his fingers around the golden bell. "I found this cracker bell in the janitor's closet. It's empty, but I can still smell the reek of magical residue that had just been drained from it." He threw a glance around the cargo hold. "Which means, Captain, I don't think we're alone." The captain wasn't sure whether to be worried or not. "And who exactly do you think is aboard my ship?" "The boy," Belsnickel announced with an icy voice that left Nick's toes to curl. He wasn't amongst the children that were taken. Once again, he threw a glance around the cargo hold, leaving Nick slipping further behind the crate of raw potatoes. "He's out there, but I suspect somewhere near." "And what exactly is it about this boy that your lord deems so special?" Belsnickel approached the captain and then gave a gentle tap on the cheek. "That doesn't concern you, nor does it pertain to your race. These are elven affairs." He whipped around, taking one step up the stairs. The captain stopped him from proceeding any further. "I am the captain of this ship, and if my crew is in danger, I have the right to know." Belsnickel reached for his sailor's cap and tugged it off, revealing a bald, crinkled head. He slowly whirled back around with a grin on his face, split from pointy ear to pointy ear. "Captain, yes, But let us not forget who really it is who is in charge of this vessel. He lifted his hands with his fingers extended, electricity jolting from his fingertips. Between his hands appeared a swirl of black, and within that swirl were the images of a little boy and a little girl shivering together in a cage of ice. The captain gazed into the vortex with quivering eyes, pooling with tears. Let us not forget, Captain, the safety of your precious grandbabies still imprisoned in CLAUS village. That is, until you've completed what was asked of you by shipping this cargo to Norway. He clapped his hands forcefully together, and the magic crumbled, slipping through his hands like sand. Nick watched as a tear streaked down the old captain's cheek, falling into his white mustache where it disappeared. I have not forgotten. Good, Belsnickel dusted his hands off. Now, tell your men to keep a lookout for a boy 15 years of age. If he's on the ship, I want him found. Yes, of course, he replied with a sigh. The captain followed the first mate up the stairs and onto the upper deck, leaving Nick breathing hard behind the crate of potatoes, with his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't realized how stiff his body had become until the captain and Belsnickel were gone. As his shoulders relaxed, he could feel his heartbeat still racing. Gilbert was right, he thought. The first mate was an elf, and he was on to them. Belsnickel knew that he wasn't amongst the children that were kidnapped from the orphanage, and that thanks to his discovery of a Cracker Bell, he could very likely be a stowaway aboard the ship, and soon the whole crew would be on the lookout for him. It sounded unbelievable to Nick that he was the sole cause to all of this fuss, being that he was just an orphan. Psst, Nick. He became surprised by a voice whispering his name. Over here. He spun around like a dog chasing after his own tail, then stopped and found himself face to face with a brown draft horse with a black mane munching on strings of wheat. Nick's eyes met with the horse's. Have I gone bonkers? He asked himself, but to which the horse neighed. Bonkers, no, but perhaps a little bit oblivious. That voice sounded awfully familiar, so much that Nick's forehead crinkled as he tried to place it. Toby? For goodness sakes, Toby, be blunt about it, a young girl's voice then shouted. Nick, we're down here. Nick's eyes dropped to the floor, and there he found several little fingers poking out from the grate he had been standing on, wiggling to get his attention. Nick dropped to the floor and peered through the holes in the metal grate. He couldn't have been more surprised. There was a small, dingy room beneath the floor that, from the looks of it, appeared to be filled with all the children that had been kidnapped from Lost Star Orphanage. Is it really him? Asked little Abigail. She was curled up in the dark, hugging her doll that had become quite filthy since her kidnapping. Oh, please tell me it's Nick. Did you say Nick? Asked Dover. Luke chimed in. Nick who? Our big brother Nick, affirmed Joey. Black frizzy hair. Black frizzy-haired Holly then asked, Where is he? Can't you see? He's right there, Isla said. Her soot-stained pigtails lifted a finger to the ceiling, where Nick's face was pressed against the grate. He's there above our heads. The children lifted their heads in chorus. They cheered, erupting into applause and screaming with laughter as they were all overcome with the joy brought to them by seeing their big brother again. Toby hushed them swiftly. Quiet, you all. He then peered back up at Nick. All 23 children huddled around, each straining to look up. Nick, how did you get there? We thought the elves had taken you. He spoke quietly through the grate. They nearly did, but luckily they didn't catch me hiding under my bed. He pulled his face from the floor, and then drew a glance around the cargo hold to ensure their continued privacy. He then pressed his face back against the cold metal bars. I can't believe you're all here. I expected the elves would have taken you all the way to the North Pole by now. Toby spoke up for the rest of them. That's where they're taking us, the North Pole. We've heard awful stories about that place. Supposedly it's filled with loads of children from all around the world, all taken from their homes and brought there enslaved by the Elf King. It's filled with children from all around the world? Nick didn't have the luxury of letting this sit in his head for any longer than it already had. Don't worry, he assured his friends. I'm going to get you all out of there. Holly spoke up. Please hurry, Nick. It's absolutely dreadful down here. Iris, her identical twin, then added, It's rather dark, too. Not to mention I'm starving, Toby whined. All they ever feed us is the same gray mush. He lifted a bowl of what the sailors had been serving them. I don't know if it's meat, cheese, or even vegetables for that matter. Either way, I can't keep it down. You already had 3 bowls for dinner, rebuked Joey. Toby shot back. Well, I can't very well starve, can I? Stay put, Nick interrupted. I'll be right back. He lifted himself up just as Toby shouted. Where are you going? Nick pushed his face back against the grate. I'm going to get Emma and Gilbert. They're waiting for me upstairs. Gilbert's here, cheered Teddy, his curly hair bouncing as he jumped in place. And Emma too, Abigail said while squeezing her doll even tighter. Yes, they're both here, Nick assured. I'll fetch them and bring them back, and then we can get you all out of here. Just stay right there. Toby turned to Isla with a confused expression. Where does he think we can go? Doesn't he know we've been locked up here for days? Isla only shrugged. Nick got himself up, his boots nearly slipping out from underneath him at how fast he took off running back through the cargo hold. He knocked into a barrel and spilt wheat across the entire floor. He didn't stop to clean it up. He charged up the stairs and fled back through the corridor, working his way through the maze of narrow hallways until he came to the metal door of the janitor's closet. He swung it open and stepped inside. Emma, Gilbert, you won't believe it. I found... He stopped, his legs feeling like they had turned to stone. Hello, Nick, said Belsnickel, with Emma in his arms and a knife to her throat. How good of you to join us, he grinned. Nick's mind fogged and buzzed. He slowly turned to find the captain holding Gilbert up by the collar of his shirt. Nick, run, Emma shouted. Belsnickel's voice remained just as calm as ever. I wouldn't do that if I were you. He pressed the blade a tad harder against Emma's throat. Unless, of course, you would like to be the cause of your friend's death? Nick stood firmly in place. I'm not running. What a pity. Belsnickel's grin grew even wider. I typically enjoy a good chase. He pulled back his knife and shoved Emma forward, leaving her falling into Nick's arms. The first mate then dropped his knife, and the moment it hit the floor, it transformed into a serpent. The snake slithered across the floor, hissing with flashing fangs. It then split into 2. One serpent curled up Nick's leg, the other Emma's. Then each of the snakes utilized their long, scaly bodies to fasten the children's arms together like a rope. Belsnickel snapped his fingers, and then the snakes transformed into chains. Gilbert took advantage of everyone's distraction. He then sunk his teeth into the captain's forearm. The captain dropped him, wailing in pain. Belsnickel rose his hands, but Gilbert had already whispered into a cracker bell he had been hiding in his sleeve. A black flare of magic shot out from Belsnickel's hands. Gilbert threw the cracker bell right into it. The bell exploded, sending a shockwave that threw everyone backwards. Nick crashed into Emma, the 2 of them knocking heads after falling to the floor. Nick's face pinched while his head throbbed. His vision went fuzzy, shapes and figures doubling and then tripling right before his eyes. But he kept it together to scour the closet. There were clouds of billowing smoke at every turn, but every so often, figures could be seen through the thick smog. Nick spotted the captain. He was out cold after having slammed his head against a metal shelf. Nick continued to peer through the fumes, soon finding Belsnickel stumbling to his feet, appearing dazed and confused, and he then found Gilbert on his knees, coughing. Nick shouted, Gilbert, get out of here! Go! Gilbert jumped to his feet and charged for the door. He had just hit the frame of the metal door when Belsnickel struck him with a curse. Gilbert froze. For a moment, it was as though time had stopped. But then something strange happened. Gilbert started to shrink, and then he shrank even more, and then more, until soon his clothes folded in on him, falling into a pile on the floor. Nick crawled over to the lump of tattered clothes and found a little brown field mouse crawling out from the sleeve of the shirt. Nick swallowed. Gilbert? But the mouse could only squeak. Ah, crazy! Alright, we're going to be reading Chapter 13 tomorrow, Escape Aboard the SS Vixen.